The curtain has come down on Act One of the world's most tragic drama. Two of the most miserable actors ever to strut across the stage of history are gone. The grim truth is that as actors they were all too real. Now that the curtain is down, we turn from the stage to the people.
And ladies and gentlemen, the people in this case are Canadians.
The news of the Allied victory in Europe reached Canada on May 7th, 1945. It did not take long for celebrations to break out in the streets of cities across the country. Celebrations continued on to May 8th, which was officially declared VE Day, VE standing for Victory in Europe. In Toronto, as noted by the Globe and Mail, after Freddie and a couple of less war-experienced mosquitoes flirted with the top stories of office buildings and played Ring Around the Rosie with the state Lancaster that droned across the sky like a tired old lady. These planes released bags of paper scraps that swirled down to merge with the paper and tape that had cascaded from office windows. Most Canadian cities and towns also held religious services of Thanksgiving, while others mourned the death of friends and family members. Other places were more somber, such as smaller towns where many families suffered the death of loved ones during the war. Also, the war was not yet over, as Japan still needed to be defeated to end the most destructive conflict in human history. As is common in the aftermath of conflict, many worried about what the post-war world would bring. In other places, the excitement quickly turned to violence. What follows is footage of celebrations and other events across Canada on VE Day. It is paired with news reports from the 7th, talking about the outbreak of celebrations that accompanied the news of the end of the war. I will give special attention to the events of VE Day in Halifax, where riots and looting broke out across the city.
Too busy walking and talking and cheering, and I can read most of the headlines on the newspapers sticking out of people's pockets. Some of them are in French. La guerre est finie, l'Allemagne capitule, l'armistice est signé, or in English, war is over, Nazis quit, Germany surrenders, Allies win in Europe. But they all mean the same thing. Victory is achieved, and this is it, and everybody's happy.
In the nation's capital, a parade of Thanksgiving is held on Parliament Hill. Veterans of two wars mingle as the acting Prime Minister makes an official pronouncement.
Your first impression on looking at this crowd is that everyone has a flag of some sort, and that those who haven't have cameras. The youngsters consider a flag indispensable. You get a Union Jack or a flag of one of the armed services if you can, or a Stars and Stripes, or a flag of Russia, France, or China. And if you can't get a flag of any country, then you get a pennant advertising soap or breakfast cereal, and you wave that instead. With many people, the celebration today has a serious undertone. Many here have lost sons, brothers, husbands in the Battle of Europe. Others are saying, "Little man, what now? What about that unfinished war in the Pacific? And what about the prospect of jobs? Now the demobilization day approaches for thousands in the armed forces, and discharge day for thousands in the war plants." Right across the street from here is a movie advertising a showing of the horrors of the German concentration camps, the Nazi murder factories. But this crowd shows little bitterness against the enemy, not on the surface anyway, certainly not today. Some young boys brought out an effigy of Hitler, lit him in the eternal flame that burns in front of the monument to our first war dead.
News of the German surrender reached Pacific Coast residents just after 7 o'clock this morning. Those lucky people who were still asleep didn't remain unconscious for long, because all the air raid sirens sounded simultaneously in the lower mainland area, and everyone knew that the long-awaited news was a fact. Something about the downtown area. Traffic cops are going crazy. Signal lights mean nothing. The cars are draped with paper and flags. One boy from the local stock exchange has his whole suit covered with ticker tape. Everyone is happy. There's a feeling of relief everywhere. A cafe man locked the doors of his establishment and ran out into the middle of Georgia Street, waved his arms and shouted, "It's over." In contrast, I saw a goodly number of middle-aged women looking dreadfully serious. Some were weeping. There are thousands like them in Canada, mothers of boys who won't be returning, boys who have given their lives, that our country may continue to be the great free Canada we have always loved. In spite of the festive spirit in the air, West Coast people have a feeling of grimness. For us, one war is over. That's good. But it means that we have to put all our efforts and a good part of our money and all our construction gangs into another war. The war with Japan goes on. The Pacific conflict is by no means over. The people of Vancouver remember the men who left for Hong Kong. They remember the campaigns and the Aleutians. They remember the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor and the once acute dangers of Japanese attacks on this coast. So while we are proud and happy about the victory in Europe, for us, Chapter 2 has a special significance.
And there's perhaps another reason why Sackville didn't burst into spontaneous cheers with the first indication of complete victory in Europe. The war has come too close home. It is too personal. I said to an office worker, "It's great news, isn't it?" She said, "Great for some." That's it. There is great news, but great only for some. In a small town, every individual may not be called upon to pay a price, but every individual knows his neighbors in a small town. And when you are conscious that VE Day has brought sorrow into the homes of 33 of your young men, that isn't something to go out and shout about. For 33 of Sackville's young men have made the supreme sacrifice. 33 out of 350 enlisted, and that's more than 10% of the population.
As it was on other great days in the past, the first word of the end of the European war came to many Haligonians from the harbor. At 7 o'clock this morning, from the waterfront, came a bedlam of sound, as the ships of many nations raised their voices in a harmonious expression of joy and thankfulness. The deep bass notes of the harbor tugs joined with the banshee wail of the corvettes and the scream of ocean-going freighters to make a symphony of deliverance. Citizens of Halifax ran from their offices and houses to join the cheering throngs that marched through the streets. Streamers and bunting appeared as if by magic. VE Day celebrations in Halifax don't officially start until tomorrow. But that hasn't stopped the citizens from crowding the downtown streets, throwing paper streamers from the office windows, and relieving their feelings in joyful dances on the pavement. Of course, lies Halifax Harbor, the harbor that has played such an important part in this war, and that now sees its activity drawing to a close. On this day of days, Halifax feels a glow of pride for the part her harbor has played in the war.
That pride was quickly replaced by disgust as riots and looting broke out across Halifax. This footage of Halifax and the riots was shot by Lionel Shatford. With the announcement of the Allied victory in Europe on May 7th, Halifax residents were given the rest of the day off. Naval personnel were also given the day off. The rioting started in the evening after a fireworks display. On May 8th, the Canadian press reported that fires burned tonight in the heart of Halifax, as civilian and service police strove to enforce a curfew and clear the streets of thousands of victory rioters who have smashed and looted virtually every store in the downtown business section. Jewelry and shoes were popular items stolen in the riots. So was alcohol, as the Keith Brewery and numerous liquor stores were looted. Navy signalman Frank O'Hara described what he saw with a streetcar. Sailors kicked off all the passengers and the conductor, and I guess one of the guys must have known how to use it, or maybe it was pretty simple. In any event, they went tearing down the street with this, and so I followed and walked down the street because I figured they couldn't go too long before they went off the tracks. Sure enough, at the first bend in the road, they went off the tracks. It didn't tip over or anything. Many suffered injuries as a result of the rioting. It was reported that scores of drunks fell into broken glass in the streets and came up bleeding from many cuts. Rioting and looting continued on the 8th. A curfew was imposed at 11 p.m., which quieted the streets. Halifax had not seen damage like this since the 1917 explosion. Three people died as a result of the riots, one from alcohol poisoning. Hundreds of businesses were damaged, over 200 people, civilian and military personnel, were charged as a result of the riots. A royal commission was held to determine the cause of the riots and who was to blame. Canadian Supreme Court Justice R. McKillop was given the responsibility of creating the report. He blamed Naval Command for their lack of awareness and letting naval personnel out freely, as well as the police for their lack of readiness. Halifax VE Day riots were a violent end to what had been a relatively quiet wartime existence in Canada itself.